Well, my parents moved from LA area where my dad was working for all these military contractors to Santa Barbara in about 1964, 1965. And so I grew up at the beach around South Bay, Newport, that whole area. And, they have these beautiful white groomed beaches, no real pollution or anything that was evident in the water. And the first thing I noticed when we got, what's all this black gooey stuff that was tar? And it was kind of everywhere. So it was quite a shock. I remember not liking it.
Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire.
You have all the sticky stuff to deal with just so you can go surfing. And it took me, a couple years to kind of learn how to navigate around it to where it finally, felt like, okay, this is home. This is where I'm going to grow up. This is where I'm going to surf. I grew up in Goleta, and so my home beach was a place called Sands, which sits atop a point called Coal Oil Point. And, there's an incredible amount of natural seepage there, just offshore of Coal Oil Point, maybe, 75 yards out from the beach. You can actually see methane and asphaltum coming to the surface on some days.
It was a different time, and a couple of things hit the news, and one was this blowout in the Santa Barbara Channel, and you referred to the seepage. And I'll just jump ahead a little bit. What happened when they tried to shut it down is they had these two giant blocks of steel and they clamped them shut around the hole that they had drilled. They needed to cap it or close it or slam the door on that. So they tried to do that. And then the oil came up and all these other seeps broke through the surface and the sea floor in 5-6 areas. And it was like completely out of control. And it went on for a long time. And it was in the news for a long time.
Environmental leaders have an answer for criticism that Ecology Week may be a diversion from more important matters in this country. They say environmental reform transcends and encompasses all other reform movements because it's a sheer battle for world survival.
I'm sure everyone's really aware that the problem exists and that something has to be done. But now we've got to channel our efforts into the right direction and, make sure that something really is done.
And the whole problem in this whole issue is that attitudes won't change that fast, as technology is. And that's the whole problem.
Who should we sort of push this awareness on? Should we push it further on the people who are rapping right now, like today, just constantly talking and talking like they have been for the last 3 or 4 years, especially on the Davis campus? Or should we really go out and propose something that is really feasible? In other words, actually start stopping what's going on.
If this is just a fad, it may be the last fad. It's a matter that requires a sustained, long siege against all the causes of pollution. And I'm talking not only of the pollution of war, that's perhaps the gravest threat, the pollution of injustice and poverty in our central cities, the pollution produced by industry, but the pollution produced by the individuals who buy from industry the products that are a part of that pollution. It requires a total commitment by most parts of our society. We probably won't succeed in persuading all parts, but by most parts, to be successful. We have to have the drive and the determination to get laws that will end pollution and control it, and unless we do, we may well be doomed.
In a moment, a report on where California stands in this battle to survive.
And the Unocal platform, known as Platform A, it was named A because it was the first offshore oil platform. Unocal actually started here in Ventura County in Santa Paula after oil was discovered during the Lincoln administration by Lincoln's chief geologist at a place called Sulphur Mountain. I've been out to visit it a couple times. As oil began to be developed in this area, petrochemical industry started to advance. It had a really interesting side effect. We were getting large amounts of oil in those days via the whaling industry. the oil industry kind of stopped the whaling industry. Even at places like Coho Point, up below Point Conception, they had a whale rendering plant up there, near where the Chumash used to be. And right next to Western Gate, which is a vital part of Chumash lore, indigenous lore in general. So this was one of the side effects. I want to say benefit. I don't know that it was a net benefit in the long run, but the whaling industry was killed off by the oil industry. So back to 1969, as I understand it, they tried to stop the seep with a combination of drilling mud and the metal plates that you mentioned, and they never were able to actually cap the leak. It kept going. A couple oil field engineers told me this. It kept going until pressure ran lower in the reserve, and then it gradually began to taper off. And I remember out there in Goleta, we had a heavier oil presence for about, I want to say about 7 or 8 years. It's a rough estimate. But I distinctly recall, like I'd walk from Full Oil Point up to Naples Point, and surf all the other spots north of there on the Gaviota coast. And the whole coast, all the rocks, everything was covered with pitch, asphaltum. And on the cliffs where you see erosion taking place, and you can see deep into the coastal morphology, you can see layers of pitch buried in the rock sediment. And so it was everywhere. In 69, but more of it everywhere. Cut to years later, that all kind of disappeared. I mean, decades later, it kind of disappeared, and there's a reason for that. And asphaltum's an interesting thing. In the Santa Barbara Channel, you have all this porosity that is exuding methane and asphaltum. And for years, UCSB geology studied it. Then one day, a team from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute came out, and they were talking to the geology department at UCSB and said, we really want to study oil seepage. And, UCSB geology went, well, have we got something to show you? And they took them out to Coal Oil Point, and the geologists from Hui said, wow, we've been looking all over the world for something like this to study. So they did an in-depth study of the oil field there. And their conclusion at the end of study was that approximately, I don't remember the exact number, but it was on the order of multiples of Exxon Valdez spills had come up from the bottom in that region. For those, listeners that might not know, Exxon Valdez was a 10 million gallon spill. So orders of multitude above that existed there. And growing up, since I fished, dove, surfed, sailed, did all that stuff, I got really well acquainted with the biome up there. And so, we had a lot of calico bass, halibut, seals, different types of marine life, not a lot of cetaceans compared to, what I see up there today. But what was going on is the benthic community, which is the bottom community, starting with a microbial community, was assigning its energy to processing all of the petrochemicals. And what that did is that left less energy to assign to the rest of the biome to develop. And decades later, I watched a bottom survey that another UCSB student had done, a dive survey, and he's swimming over the areas I used to dive, and it looked totally different, Robert. We used to do the same thing the Chumash did. We would use to start fires on the beach because that back then, wetsuits were kind of in their infancy, and coming from a family with 6 kids, I couldn't really, nor did I really want to, wear a dive wetsuit. So we would burn asphaltum on the beach, pitch on the beach to start our fires. And you'd keep a fire burning. You'd start it before you go out in the water. You'd surf until you were frozen, and then come in and sit by the fire and warm up, and then go back out and surf some more. But all that changed over the years. We made fires on the beach illegal. There was less pitch on the beach to burn, and everything really changed until one day. Here's the one day. We have oil pipelines running all over the region. We have a couple different refineries. We have pipelines going everywhere. They bring the oil ashore to the processing terminals, and we had a pipeline. I want to call it a blowout, but it wasn't really a blowout. The pipeline was worn out.
The Coast Guard is investigating an oil slick off Santa Barbara County, California. It's not far from where an oil pipeline broke in May. Carter Evans is following this. Carter, what can you tell us?
Well, Jane, it looks like a picture-perfect day here at Goleta Beach, but if you look closer here at the sand, this is what you find: a thick, tarry, oily substance washing up. Certainly smells like oil. If you take a look from the air, we can give you a better idea of what this oil slick looks like and the size of it. It's about 2 miles long.
Which soiled Gaviota with, I think, a few thousand gallons of oil. And as a result of that, Santa Barbara County said, nah, we're not going to let you guys transport oil anymore. And so they stopped oil field activity in the Santa Barbara Channel. A couple companies went belly up, and I subscribed to the Board of Supervisors newsletter up there, and I got a note that 2 kayakers had reported a large oil spill off Goleta Beach, which is just south of Coal Oil Point by about 2 miles. And we're trying to determine the source. And I wrote them a note back, and I said, well, it's been a few months since we shut down drilling. All of the holding facilities are full, and the pressure's going up in the reserve. And here's where that oil is coming from based on what the wind has been doing and what I know of the area.
It was first reported by kayakers who paddled through the sludge about 1,000 feet offshore. Now, most of the oil is in the water, but as I said, some is starting to wash up on area beaches. Not clear exactly where this oil is coming from. It could be natural seepage. There is a lot of oil in the ground here. But the slick has been spotted in the vicinity of an offshore oil rig owned by Veneco. Now, the company we know applied for an emergency permit this week to remove oil from that platform.
And the next day, there was the funniest bulletin. We've been informed by an expert resource that it's a naturally occurring seep, and we're probably going to be seeing more of it. So that's how all of that stuff interrelates.
Veneco says there have been no incidents at its facilities. Now, this all comes as the cleanup was just completed from another oil spill just 16 miles away. In that case, a pipeline owned by Plains All American had ruptured. It leaked 100,000 gallons of oil into the Pacific. The cleanup took 2 months at a cost of $92 million. That beach just reopened 2 weeks ago. Jane, it's still unknown exactly how much oil is in the water right now and how long it's going to take to clean it up.
Carter Evans, thank you.
We're starting to see the real impact on wildlife from that devastating oil spill along the central California coast. Governor Brown signed an executive order to eliminate any red tape that would slow down a cleanup. And there is now a frantic effort to save animals that have been caught up in the mess. The cleanup teams are scouring the beaches near Santa Barbara where that pipeline failed. And close to 20 ships are now trying to skim oil from the water. We sent our own Betty Yu to Refugio State Beach with a look at how bad it really is. Betty?
Ken, it is bad out here, and the trouble with cleaning up oil slicks is that they are moving targets. They get washed out to sea, and they spread around with the current and with the winds. This has been a 24/7 operation, and it could take months before this beach is fully cleaned up. Oil is everywhere it shouldn't be. Coast Guard vessels are corralling it. Workers in protective suits are shoveling it. So far, 7,700 gallons of oily water have been mopped up from the Pacific Ocean, about a third of what was spilled in the water. The cleanup is very labor intensive. As you can see behind me, these workers are combing through oil-soaked rocks, and they're picking up seaweed, kelp, any sort of vegetation, and putting them in plastic bags.
The greatest challenge is really just time.
For the company at fault, Plains All American Pipeline, they're looking at serious troubles ahead.
We're not going away. We're going to be here until it's returned back to the way it was.
This is not the first time the company had to answer to the public. It was forced to pay $44 million in pipe upgrades in civil penalties after 10 leaks around the country in 2010. An LA Times analysis found that its rate of incidents per mile of pipe is more than 3 times the national average.
How do you rate your regulatory record overall?
So let me clarify that a little bit more. So we're required to fill out certain federal documents.
At a press conference today, its safety director repeatedly evaded questions.
But how do you rate your record?
Again, our goal is to continue to improve. Our goal is 0.
Back on the beach, people are finding wildlife, dead and alive, on shore.
There'll be long-term impacts, there's no question, but I can't address exactly what those might be right now.
Now, we are on 2 beaches that have been shut down ahead of the Memorial Day weekend, and the company today just began excavating that pipeline in hopes of finding more clues as to the cause of this spill. Live at Refugio State Beach, Betty Yu, KPIX 5.
All right, now take a look at some of these pictures from the spill zone. Dolphins were spotted swimming near the oil slick. They seem to be going in circles trying to avoid the oil surrounding them.
So something happened in the United States of America, politically and socially, as a result of this oil escapade, and also a couple of other events that were negative on the environment, like the day that the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland burst in. Well, actually, it had burst into flames several times.
Yep.
During the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, fires were commonplace on rivers throughout the industrial heartland. Numerous rivers in Cleveland, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, and Detroit were seen as little more than dump sites for industrial waste, until a fire on the Cuyahoga River caught the nation's attention.
Rolling into Cleveland to the lake, there's an oil barge winding down the Cuyahoga River, rolling into Cleveland to the lake. Cleveland, city of light, city of magic. Cleveland, city of light, you're calling me. Cleveland, even now I can remember, 'cause the Cuyahoga River goes smoking through my dreams. Burn on, big river, burn on. Burn on, big river, burn on. Lord can make you turn.
In Washington, D.C., legislators passed the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, which President Richard Nixon signed into law on January 1st, 1970. The act established the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, which in its first year of existence had a budget of $1.4 billion and an employee roster of 5,800.
This is how we grew up. This is our era. This is what we learned from. And what America learned from was something oddly different. And it was the result of a senator from Wisconsin that thought that it was probably a good time to take a different course. And the EPA was formed. And the first Earth Day.
You hear the word ecology. That's a big science, not a narrow one. It's a big concept. And it is concerned with all the ramifications of all the relationships of all living creatures to each other and their environment. It is concerned with the total ecosystem, not just how we dispose of tin cans, bottles, and our garbage. It is concerned with the habitat of marine creatures, animals, birds, and man. And our goal is not just an environment of clean air and water and scenic beauty, while forgetting about the worst environments in America, in the ghettos, in the Appalachians, and elsewhere. Our goal is an environment of decency, quality, and mutual respect for all human beings and all other living creatures. An environment without ugliness, without ghettos, without poverty, without discrimination, without hunger, and without war. Our goal is a decent environment in its broadest and deepest sense. And winning the environmental war is a whole lot tougher challenge by far than any other challenge ever to confront mankind.
A lot of people don't realize that both the EPA and the NOAA were formed as a result of political actions during the Nixon administration. And as I understand it, Nixon had a look at the oil spill in Santa Barbara and was shocked by it. But he also had a look at all of the different departments and agencies tasked with managing all these different aspects of industrial development. And he thought it would be good for the American taxpayer to combine all of these under one organizational umbrella, which was the Environmental Protection Agency at the time. So we centralized all of these entities, and it evolved into what it is today. Same thing with the NOAA.
It has very idealistic language about man and nature living together productively and setting the conditions under which that can take place. I mean, it's really inspiring and progressive, really, for that time. And under Nixon also was created the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act separately.
Right.
We all of a sudden had an environmental movement in the country.
I remember before moving to Santa Barbara, we lived in Whittier, so my dad could commute into his defense work with all the defense contractors. And the air pollution was so bad there in the LA basin. On some days it looked like fog, except it had a brown cast to it. And I was ill all the time as a child living there. And I used to have to go in every 2 weeks and get allergy shots, one in each arm. And when we moved out of Whittier and moved up to Santa Barbara, within about 3 months, I stopped having allergies. I never had to have another allergy shot. So it said a lot about the role of pollution and air pollution to me about public safety and public health, which really drove the original environmental movement. And today it's far better than it ever was before.